This is Skip Lockwood, and you're listening to Mets Musing. I was a pitcher, a relief pitcher, a closer with the New York Mets. I have a new book out called Inside Pitch, Mets Musing. Thank you very much.
This is Len and Jeff from Baseball and Barbecue.
And the one place to go for New York Mets news,
Past week game reviews,
upcoming series previews,
interviews,
analysis,
opinion, and what's going down on the farm. It's Mets Musings with Gary Mack. So keep the faith, stay optimistic, and let's go Mets.
Mets Musings with
Gary Mack.
Now it's time for some New York Mets baseball talk. Here's Gary Mack bringing you the latest news and analysis from Mets Nation and the world of baseball on another edition of Mets Musings.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Mets Musings, episode number 327. Hope everybody had a great week out there. Better week than the Metsies, but I seem to say that every week lately. But went on the road, 8 games. They lost 3 out of 4 to the Brewers. Should have won 3 of those games, at least. Went to Atlanta, split the 4 there, but should have swept Atlanta. They could have went 7-1 on this trip. The bullpen was disastrous, to say the least. The bullpen was just awful. Blew leads and didn't blow close leads. 6-2. Forget 4-2. Couple of run leads, and the bullpen is not doing well right now. And you wish that the starters could go longer because, boy, it's nerve-wracking trying to get those guys in there. The bullpen help. So this is where we're at, though, with this team right now. Bullpen is very weak. They keep bringing guys up. We'll get into that a little bit more. Some of the guys that came up and are now with the Metsies, but I don't know, folks. It's injuries are starting to mount now. We had Syndergaard, Matz, Flores joining Cespedes and Frazier. And who else did I miss? Well, of course, David Wright and Darno out for the season. It's just a very tough time in Metsland. And over the weekend, I finished reading Davey Johnson's book, and I'm convinced by the way he talked that this team is poorly constructed. It's just not set up right. The bench is awful. Why is Jose Reyes still in there? Guillorme goes 4 for 9, I think it was, in a doubleheader. 3 runs batted in, and the next night Jose Reyes is back in the lineup. Why is Jose Reyes even on this team anymore? We need to rust the spot, folks. Phillip Evans can do what he does. Luis Guillorme, who's hitting a little bit, can do what he does, and yet we keep putting in Jose Reyes. He's got to go soon. So here's some of the moves the Mets have made to fortify the bullpen. Guys have been going up and down like crazy. So let's see. The latest move was right-handed pitcher Tim Peterson, right-handed pitcher Scott Copeland, and left-handed pitcher Buddy Bauman have been called up from AAA Las Vegas. They were available last night in the bullpen. Peterson did get in. Pitched pretty good. Not great, but he gave up a home run, but got through 2 innings. 1 run. So didn't do too bad a job. To make room for both pitchers on the MLB roster, Phillip Evans and Jacob Rame were optioned to AAA. Previously, Noah Syndergaard was placed on the disabled list. To make room for Peterson and Copeland on the 40-man roster, Juan Lagares was placed on the 60-day disabled list, and left-handed pitcher P.J. Conlon was designated for assignment. And I'm very confused about that move. P.J. Young, still young. He had a couple bad outings, okay. But, boy, to designate him for assignment right away, that seemed a little harsh and a little rough. But, you know, I guess they needed the room on the roster, and he was the one that had to go. So we'll see what happens with him. My guess is if he clears waivers, they'll assign him back to Tidewater. Listen to me. To Las Vegas, and he'll continue on from there, but he'll be off the 40-man roster. Much of like what they did with Phillip Evans earlier in the winter time. When they let him go, he cleared waivers and then came back, and now he's been up and down and back on the 40-man roster, as a matter of fact. So funny how that happens sometimes. Okay, let's see. What else? Todd Frazier is starting tonight in Vegas. He's going to play 5 innings in a rehab assignment. He's been on the disabled list since May 8th. Took batting practice last week for the first time since suffering his injury before progressing to running. David Wright was playing catch in the outfield Citi Field prior to tonight's game against the Cubbies. He had been hoping to begin baseball activity at the end of the month and is expected to transition to baseball activity within the next 1 to 3 weeks, Sandy Alderson said today. He hasn't played in 2 years, and it has been a rough recovery road for Mr. Wright. And let's just hope that he can at least get back to make one more appearance and call it quits. We'll see how that's going to pan out, but he is certainly giving it his all to try to make something happen. Sandy Alderson talked to the press today, and it seemed that there's some frustration coming out in Scrappy Sandy over some of these injuries that the Mets are accumulating. They changed the medical staff, thinking that might have something to do with it, and yet the injuries still continue to mount. I don't know what the answer is. I think some of it could be age, some of it could be overemphasis on certain things. Nobody knows. But I think this team really needs to look in the mirror, this organization, and look hard at its philosophy, because I think they're going in the wrong direction philosophy-wise. I think they need to get players that are more well-rounded. They're not developed enough in the minors. A guy like Rosario can't bunt. He's learning how to steal bases on a major league level. That should be stuff that's taught in the minor leagues. And they just don't seem to be teaching that stuff here. And it could be everywhere. It's probably unfair to blame just the Mets, but hey, that's who we watch. That's who we follow. And just doesn't seem like the development is there of these guys. They come up, they're still raw. And you want them to be a little raw, but you want them to have a little polish as well. They should be able to do basics well. And we don't always see that with the Mets. And that's one thing I think they have to look into. They have to do better with their drafting. That's one reason why they brought back Omar Minaya. He has a good eye for talent. Hopefully he'll find some diamond in the rough, perhaps, in this draft. But they have to get better at these things. That's the only way they're going to build the farm system up and, keep this team going forward instead of staggering around like they have been this year so far, and certainly last year with the injuries and whatnot. So we'll have to wait and see. Going to take a break here. Got a great guest on. I interviewed him last evening, so you'll see a completely different change of clothes. But he's going to be on next. His name is Brett Topel. He's been on this show before. He's got a great new book out, and you're going to enjoy it. But first, let's take a break and listen to these great messages.
Looking for great Cardinals talk? Then check out Conversations with C70. My name's Daniel Shoftaw, and I talk with some of the great bloggers on the internet today about their teams, but it always goes back to the Cardinals. Find the latest episode on my website, www.cardinal70.com, or at baseballpodcast.net.
Did you know that Baseball PhD can be heard on baseballtalkradio.com?
Our shows rotate with other top baseball podcasts.
Now don't forget, that's baseballtalkradio.com.
With us, we'll help you get a PhD in life through baseball.
With baseballtalkradio.com, you'll hear the rest of the excellent universe of baseball podcasts.
516-619-6341. That is the comment voicemail hotline if you'd like to be a part of the show. And drop us a line, leave us a comment or a voicemail, question, anything at all. Call that number, 516-619-6341. Or go to MetsMusings.com and click on that widget in the middle of the screen, and that's a speak pipe, and you can leave a voicemail right through your computer through your computer's microphone. Or if you prefer to do things the old-fashioned way, send us an email at metsmusings@gmail.com. The Facebook page is facebook.com/groups/MetsMusings, and the Twitter handle is at MetsMusings1.
With all the Mets news, it is the news from around the world and around the corner. Here's Gary Mack.
Joining me this evening is an author. He's an author of 3 books, and he's got a new book coming out, so we'll say it's 4. But he wrote So You Think You're a New York Mets Fan, Stars, Stats, Records, and Memories for True Diehards. Also wrote When Shea Was Home, the story of the 1975 Mets, Yankees, Giants, and Jets. And Simply the Best, the story of the 1929-31 Philadelphia Athletics dynasty. And he's got this book coming out very soon, next week, I believe. It's Miracle Moments in New York Mets History. He is Brett Topel. And Brett, welcome back to Mets Musings.
Gary, thanks so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to be on your show.
Brett, we were talking before we started recording here, and you mentioned this is your 3rd book in the last couple of years, and you've really been on a fever pitch writing lately. Yeah,
well, thank you. Yes, this is the 3rd in 3 years. As you mentioned, When Shea Was Home came out 2 years ago, and last year, So You Think You're a New York Mets Fan, which was a trivia book, and now this one, which is in one of the series in Sports Publishers, So You Think You're a Blank. I'm sorry, that's last year. So it's Miracle Moments in Blank History, and this one is Miracle Moments in New York Mets History, and it was really an honor to be able to write this book.
Now, were you asked to write this, or did you come with the idea, or how did that all come together?
Yeah, no, I was actually asked by my editor at Sports Publishers. They had, the Mets trivia book from last year was a part of a series, and as was this. And to be honest with you, Gary, I wasn't planning on writing a book, after the Mets trivia book, at least for a little while. That one was the 2nd book in 2 years, and I kind of wanted a break, but I was fortunate enough to be asked to write this book. And, if you're asked to write a book, at least for me, that chronicles, the top moments in Mets history, and obviously I'm a Mets fan, I grew up a Mets fan, it's a hard thing to say no to, and they were gonna have this book come out whether I wrote it or not, and I figured this was an opportunity that was too good to pass up, so I accepted, and really very proud of the results.
Yeah, you could have had a non-Met fan write the book, so better than a Met fan writes this book.
Well, I appreciate that, although these days even the most ardent Mets fan has to have nerves of steel.
Yeah, that's for sure. Now, Brett, you broke this book up into 31 moments. Any specific reason why 31?
So there's a line early in the book, and I'm sure you saw it, and you're giving me a softball to start with. So obviously it's Piazza's number, and there's a line early in the book that says, if you don't know why I chose 31 moments, you should stop reading right now. And of course I've had some very good friends, and including Met fans, that said, I don't understand, why is it 31? So then I realized not everybody knows everybody's uniform number, despite the fact that Piazza is hanging high above Citi Field, retired. But Piazza is somebody who I've always considered to be just one of my all-time favorite players, and I thought it would be a good way, a good number, and it actually worked out pretty well. Although we added a few bonus ones, we snuck a few bonus ones at the end after the 31, but number 34 wasn't as enticing as 31.
Well, it would have been awkward too to have like 8.
Yes, exactly. Well, yes, I know. And as us Mets fans tend to have to take from various Yankee fans, when you tell them you're writing a book called Miracle Moments in New York Mets History, they say, oh, that sounds like it's going to be a small flyer. So I'm proud to say that I had 31 and I could have kept going, but I'm pleased with the 31 we ended up with.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. You've laid it out in chronological order and broke it up into a regular season and some postseason moments. And I don't want to give everything away about the book, but it's really I urge people to get it because it is a great book. And there's a bunch of books that are coming out now. I'm sure you know that, a lot of competition. The Keith Hernandez book is out, the Davey Johnson book. But this is a book that you can pick up and read and put down and switch around in chapters, and you don't have to. It's a nice, relaxing read.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I really I set out to write a book that I would want to read as a Met fan, and that's kind of always what is my philosophy. I like the idea, and in many ways, the trivia book was like this last year as well. But I was able to tell 31 short stories in this book, obviously being all tied together with the fact that it's the Mets and it's Mets history, and there's certain chapters are intertwined, certainly, whether it's the 86 playoffs into the 86 World Series, and so on and so forth. But as you said, if you just want to sit down by the pool or by the beach or wherever you are, and you can kind of pick and choose your chapters depending on the moments that you wanted to read about, it's not the kind of book that you necessarily have to sit down and read from A to Z.
Yeah, and that's what's so great about it, though, because it is that, and you can just look and see, oh, yeah, let me read that and get a different viewpoint on it. And I also like the fact that you included some of the radio and television calls in that. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that actually came to me early in the writing process. I had researched the book, and I got to, among the people I talked to, I got to speak to Howie Rose and Steve Gelbs and Ed Randall, certainly broadcasters, and to me, the radio and TV calls really become almost as big as the moment itself, in many ways. We remember, Vince Scully's call of the ball going down, toward Buckner, and some of us also remember Bob Murphy's call of that. But it's ingrained. Those calls are ingrained in us. So I really wanted that to be a part of the book. So almost every chapter has, the radio or television play-by-play call included in it, because to me, that is, in essence, how we remember a lot of these moments. Whether it's Andy Chavez, leaping over the wall and remembering Gary Cohen, screaming, "He made the catch," or, Howie Rose on Piazza's post 9/11 home run saying, "This one's got a chance." We tend to remember the calls, and the Mets announcers, and I'm sure maybe Yankee fans and other sports fans feel this way as well, but because the same three gentlemen called Mets games for so many years, Ralph Kiner, Bob Murphy, and Lindsey Nelson, and you heard those people's voices, as much as you've heard anybody's voices, and then more recently on the radio with obviously Howie and Josh, and on TV with Gary, Keith, and Ron, and I think that becomes part of the soundtrack of baseball, and I wanted to kind of pay homage to that.
It's so true, I can remember when I was younger, you're walking down the beach and you're just going from transistor radio to transistor radio, hearing Bob Murphy call the game or Lindsey Nelson, because in those days, if you remember in the early days, they used to do both. They would switch TV and radio, and so you'd get both, all three of those guys on, and just an amazing thing. And I think it's a nice touch for the book, because that's, as you say, that's sometimes you remember that. I mean, one of my favorite moments is Bob Murphy in that game against, I'm not as good as dates and all of that, against Philadelphia, where they had like a 10-0 lead. And Philadelphia came back, and the game ended on a line drive. And Murphy said at the end, they win the damn thing. Because he was so frustrated by the whole, I guess, because the game went, had this big lead, took everybody out, and then the Phillies started coming back. And that's one of my favorite calls of all time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Murph never lived that one down, because he was not a man who would say "damn" very much on a broadcast. Nobody would, and especially not Murph. And but it's certainly an endearing moment. And yeah, I think the thing about the Mets, whether it's TV and Gary Cohen doing play-by-play or radio with Howie Rose doing play-by-play, you have two men who grew up as Mets fans, possibly as big of Mets fans as anybody who's watching. So you kind of feel that they get it, and they live and die by the same wins and losses that the rest of the fans do. So I think the Mets are extremely lucky to have two very knowledgeable and really people who respect the team and its team's history.
Yeah, and they're easy to listen to too, and they have a good time, even though it's very difficult at this particular time. But you can tell they love what they do, and they're having a great time doing it.
Absolutely.
Now, the stories. How did you decide on what you put in? How did that all come about? The choosing of the moments, and obviously the order was chronological, so we don't have to get into that. But how did you decide what to pick? Because there's a couple in there that are a little different, if you would. And I was just interested to know, how did you come about and pick out these particular 31 moments?
Sure, it's a great question, and I think when I first agreed to do the book, they asked me to submit a list of moments that I thought, and we hadn't really settled on 31 at that point, so we were just kind of going back and forth. And I've worked with a couple of really good editors at Sports Publishing, Julie Gans, who was my editor on this book and on the Shea book, and another gentleman, Ken Samuelson, who helped me, who edited my Mets trivia book. So the three of us kind of went back and forth, and they had made some suggestions that I hadn't thought of, and like you said, there's a few that are off the beaten path that you might say, all right, well, this is not really a miraculous moment, but is a moment. One of them that actually I did not think of. In my initial list, but they did, and I was actually really happy with the chapter, was Willie Mays returning and hitting a home run in his first game against the San Francisco Giants, of all teams.
Right.
So, that's not a moment I don't think the Mets fans consider a miraculous moment in team history, but it certainly was a memorable moment, and, Unfortunately, I wasn't able to interview Willie Mays about that moment, but I was able to talk to John Matlack and get a feeling of his feelings as a young pitcher, what it was like to have one of the greatest players to ever live come to the Mets and homer in his first game back. So yeah, there was a lot of back and forth, but there was no arguing. I think we were all pretty happy with the moments we ended up with.
Yeah, they're all very interesting, and I mean, there's some of the obvious ones to their fans. Don't worry about that. The Johan Santana no-hitter, the winning, in '86, and all of that kind of stuff. But I like a lot of people don't remember Willie Mays coming back, and that was one thing I remember, and it was interesting to see another viewpoint on it. And you've got DeGrom making the All-Star team and the inning that he had in the All-Star game that year, and lots of other fine moments like that. So it's really did you have to do a lot of research for the book and go back and you said you did interview some former players and whatnot. Take us through the process a little bit.
Sure. Well, to me, a lot of these moments have been spoken about many times. So for what I try to do, whenever I tried to do this with the trivia book as well, but it's especially this book, I tried to give it a fresh spin, and by doing, the only way to do that is to really speak to, people who either played in the game or reported the game or announced the game, and of course of all 31 chapters, I wasn't able to do that, but I was able to speak to former players from each, important time, in other words. So I was able to speak to Jay Hook, who won the first ever Met. I was able to speak to John Matlack and Jerry Koosman and Howard Johnson and guys who lived through the moments and were really able to give me, firsthand accounts, and maybe also able to tell some new stories, even though the moment might be 30 or 40 years old. But, Jerry Koosman gave me some great stuff about, the moment, the last play of the Mets winning the World Series in 1969, some stories I had never heard before. As he was waiting for the ball to nestle out into the glove for the final out. So, what I try to do is get as much, new material as I can, combine that with research of old newspaper clippings that maybe haven't been seen in many, many years. The good news about writing books today is that, you have an online archive, which goes back, to any day you need. You could basically get a copy of whatever newspaper you need. So, but a lot of those, papers haven't been seen since the 60s or 70s or 80s. And, we're talking 30, 40, 50 years. And I think any fresh or, first-hand accounts really bring the book to life. And that's what I really tried to accomplish.
Well, going in line with that, speaking to Jay Hook, you mentioned it that one of his 13 grandchildren is living in New York now as a Met fan, and said that you. Well, I'll let you say it. What she said to her grandfather.
Yeah, I think she was basically saying how cool it was that he. It was really at the end of a very, very good conversation I had with Jay. He's just such a gentleman, and told a couple of stories that did not have anything to do with the first win. And in fact, in the acknowledgments, I have a whole little section about some interaction he had with famed sports writer Robert Lipsyte and Casey Stengel. And so I tell some more Jay Hook stories towards the end of the book. But he was basically saying that one of his grandchildren, said, how cool it was that she was living in New York and she's a Mets fan, and that to know that he won the first ever game for the team, and that it really, gave it start. It was the legacy. So, from the very beginning, the very first win, that still felt very strongly in his family. And not a lot of Met fans today, certainly young Met fans, would not only not know the name Jay Hook, they wouldn't know if Jay Hook was sitting next to them at Citi Field. But I think that's why these kind of books are good, because, in the same book you have Jay Hook talking about the first win he's ever for the Mets, and you have Bartolo Colon hitting a home run in San Diego. So, it fills the gamut of all different kind of moments, and Jay was just one of many special people I got to talk to.
And it gives a history of the team that, as you say, a lot of the young fans don't know about, and and yet it's not a long drawn out history book on the Mets. It's concise, it's well done, easy to read, and gives you a lot of things. And Jay Hook, I can remember him like it was yesterday, but I'm an old guy.
But not too many young Met fans remember him, and it's a shame really, because as we talked about for his about his granddaughter, what she said is he really is Mets history.
Sure.
And the sad thing is I'm friends with a bunch of Met fans that are on the younger side. I would say as we all get on the older side, they're on the younger side, but they don't forget about the 60s and 70s. I mean, 1986 was 30 plus years ago. So
right.
It's as painful as that sounds. It's generational, and to me, if you root for the blue and orange, it's important to know what came before. And all these players that we have today, and whether you talk about Hojo and Keith and Gary and the 86 guys or the 69 team. I mean, the Mets, it's basically been 69, 73, 86, 2000, 06 a little bit almost, and then 15.
Right.
But there's been so many moments in between that didn't end up in World Series berths, and I think those moments are important as well.
It is. It's important to any team, I think, and you can't lose that. And of course, when the Mets moved to Citi Field, there was that big criticism that they weren't really embracing the history, and I think they're trying to do a little bit better with that, but I still think they have a long way to go.
Yeah, I think the problem is that history happens over time, right? So I think the 2015 season went a long way in making Citi Field like the Mets' true stadium, and I think that people sort of identify that now. The first several years Citi Field was open, I personally had a really hard time. And by the way, let me preface that by saying I wanted a new stadium more than anybody wanted a new stadium, and I wanted to get rid of Shea Stadium. Of course, as soon as Shea Stadium got knocked down, you start missing Shea Stadium.
Right.
But listen, you only have to be at a game at Citi Field for about 5 minutes. And remember that there was nothing but hot dogs and peanuts at Shea Stadium and some nice Mama Corona's sandwiches in the back behind home plate. But if you were in the mezzanine or upper deck, there was nothing at Shea Stadium. So there's no comparison of the stadiums, obviously. But from a historical point of view, you have to make history in that stadium. And I think 2015 went a short way in doing that. And of course, Santana pitched a no-hitter there. But most of the moments that are in this book either happened at Shea Stadium or happened when the Mets, were playing their home games at Shea Stadium, because most of their history was obviously at Shea Stadium.
Right.
But I think that'll happen. I think Citi Field, it's our home. It's going to be our home forever now at this point, until the next stadium is built in however many years. And I don't have as much problem going to the games now as I did when Citi Field first opened. I think they went a long way in improving the stadium, and I certainly think the Mets fans call it home.
I agree. I think the addition of the Hall of Fame and the banners around and stuff really went a long way to make it feel more homey there than it did in the beginning. But there's a lot of nostalgia for Shea Stadium as well.
Yeah, there's no question about that. But I mean, I think I'm very happy actually. And you and I might have spoken about this in the past, but I'm happy that Shea Stadium has nostalgia now, because I think the last few years of Shea Stadium there was nothing but people wanting to get out of there as quick as possible. And of course, as Citi Field started to kind of grow out in left center field, everybody started getting excited that finally Shea Stadium would be gone. And then, like I said, Shea Stadium gets knocked down, and at least for me, you have this feeling in the pit of your stomach, like, oh my God, I lost a piece of my childhood.
Yeah.
Because I can't even tell you. I have a few moments at Citi Field that have been memorable, but I have dozens of moments, obviously, at Shea Stadium that I remember that whether it was with friends or my dad or my parents, and I think that the generation of Mets fans that's coming up now will certainly have hopefully have those same moments at Citi Field. But yeah, I think I'm happy that Shea Stadium is remembered fondly as opposed to some other stadiums that have gone away in recent years. And it was just its time. I mean, Shea Stadium was outdated, by the mid 70s, and it was only built in 1964. So it was not really a stadium built to endure, although it actually was a stadium built to endure and be a multi-sport stadium. But it just wasn't. It didn't end up what it was intended to be. And I'm happy people look back on it fondly, but I'm also happy that we're in a new stadium.
Yeah, I agree. It's so much more nicer to be there. It's a lovely atmosphere. But as you say, it was our childhood being at Shea Stadium, and it does feel like some of that's missing. Now, of all these moments that you wrote about, which is one of your favorites?
It's a great question. It's a good question, a hard question. One of the moments I got to write about is one of my all-time favorite moments ever in Shea Stadium, and that happened to be Todd Pratt's home run against Matt Manti to win the series against Arizona. Because that was personally, and I wasn't at Game 6 in '86, and I wasn't at a lot of other big games at Shea Stadium. But to me, that was the loudest I had ever heard Shea Stadium, and I think the reason it was so loud, or that I remembered it being so loud, is remember when Steve Finley jumped for the ball, no one knew if he caught it or not for a split second, and so the stadium went silent and then erupted. And to me, that's always been one of my favorite Met moments. I have a picture in my office of Todd Pratt, rounding the bases, pumping his fist. I have my ticket stub in that picture frame with the photo. So that's certainly a moment that I remember fondly. So I enjoyed writing about that. And then one of the moments that I really, really enjoyed writing about was the '86 Game 6, and not because, now it's probably, without a doubt, the most talked about Mets moment, the Mookie Wilson's ground ball going through Bill Buckner, and how could you possibly put a fresh slant on that? But, Howard Johnson was on deck at that moment, and he had a better view than anybody in the world. There was only 55,000 people there, but if you speak to 90,000, they were there for that Game 6. But Howard Johnson was on deck. There's nobody who had a better view of the ball rolling down the line than Howard Johnson. And being able to speak to Hojo about that, and then actually being able to ask him, it's a question I always wanted to ask him, and I quite frankly, I wasn't sure if he was going to want to give me an answer, was that if, a lot of people say that Mookie would have beaten Buckner to the bag anyway, but if Mookie was safe at first, Ray Knight wouldn't have been able to score. He would have had to stop at third. So it would have been first and third, and Hojo would have been up. And I asked him, have you ever let yourself go to a place where you could visualize that at bat? And I kind of expected him to say, once we won, but he gave me a very different answer. And I know you read the book, so you know it. But he basically said, I faced Mike Torres many times. I'm sorry, Bob Stanley many times. And I visualized that at bat, and I knew what I was going to do. I knew what pitches I was going to get from him, and gave me just a real, fun, interesting answer to a question that I wasn't sure what kind of an answer I was going to get. So that chapter got very long, very fast. One of the things I take a great amount of pride in this book is that, as you mentioned, and I appreciate it, these chapters are short, manageable, easy to read, easy to digest chapters. That one got long fast because Hojo just gave me such great stuff. And then contrary to that, I got to speak to Ed Randall, who was covering the game for Major League Baseball. At that very moment, while Howard Johnson had the best seat in the house, Ed Randall was down in the Jets locker room watching on a 3-inch color TV because that's where reporters were at that moment. So he obviously had the worst seat in the house. So being able to kind of transpose those two, or I guess compare those two opinions and interviews really made that for a fun chapter.
And what moment was the most difficult to write?
Difficult in that it was hard to dredge up, or just as far as the actual mechanics of it?
Yeah, just a combination of both.
Well, I think that the answer to that is to write about the 2015 playoff run, because I think there's a couple of moments in Mets history and that I chronicle in this book that Met fans don't really know how to consume in a positive way, right? We have Endy Chavez's catch, which is a great moment, but obviously that game didn't end well. We have, Robin Ventura's grand slam single, but obviously the next game things didn't work out well, thanks to Kenny Rogers' bases loaded walk at the end. But I think the one that I had the hardest time trying to wrap my head around was the 2015 run, because Daniel Murphy was such a big part of that run. And obviously the Mets don't make it to the World Series in 2015 if it's not for Daniel Murphy. That's not even debatable. If Daniel Murphy's not on the Mets in 2015, they don't go to the World Series. But yet now Daniel Murphy is viewed as, an arch enemy, not only playing for the Washington Nationals, who have beat up on the Mets the last several years, last couple of years, but playing at a level against the Mets that is absolutely insane. Of course, he's been out all year injured, but the 2 years that he played against the Mets, 16 and 17, and so I think, and I asked Steve Gelbs about this, who was really very, honest about it. He said, "Listen, I think that the Met fans should be proud of what Daniel Murphy did for them, and what he's done since then is just, ridiculously amazing." But I think we're trying to wrap your head around the Daniel Murphy situation. And because it's so fresh, it's not something that happened 10 or 20 or 30 years ago.
Right.
It happened very recently and is continuing to happen. I don't think any of us have a doubt that when Daniel Murphy gets back, he's going to do something bad against the Mets, for the Mets fans. Good for him, bad for the Mets fans. And, I think it's hard to come to terms with that because of how important he was. I think Met fans would have loved for him to be a superhero forever thanks to 2015.
Well, Brett, it's a terrific book, and all the best on it. And you're going to be making some appearances, so tell us about that.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. My first appearance, we're going to have a book launch event, actually a book review in Huntington, where I've seen you many times, and hopefully you'll be able to make it out. It's this coming Monday, June 4th. At 7 p.m., and it is the official launch of the book, and that's my first event, and then I'm going to have another one on June 19th at Turn of the Corkscrew Books and Wine, a really cool little bookstore in Rockville Center. So if anybody is in that area, I would love to see you at that event. But first, it's Monday, June 4th at Book Review at 7 p.m., and I don't think I'll have as many people as Keith had for his event a couple of weeks ago, but if Met fans turn out, I'll be very happy.
Well, if you get a quarter of the amount that Keith had, you'd be doing pretty good.
Let me tell you something. I did not see you there. I don't know if you were there. I happened to stop by. The amount of people for Keith, and good for Keith. I mean, listen, I have not read Keith's book yet. I've read about half of it. And the crowd he got, any author would be envious of. But the title of his book is "I'm Keith Hernandez," and obviously I can't state that, so I'm not Keith Hernandez. But I did write a lot about him in this book, though. If that makes it any better.
There you go. Well, Brett, I want to thank you once again for coming on, and it's always a great pleasure to talk to you.
Gary, listen, I can't thank you enough. It's an honor and really always a pleasure to be on your show. Keep doing what you're doing because all Met fans really appreciate Mets Musings.
Thank you so much. Miracle Moments in New York Mets History, Brett Topel. Check it out. Buy it. It's a terrific read, and I'll be back right after this.
Baseball and BBQ, your place for interesting baseball talk, opinions, and history.
Baseball and BBQ, your place for barbecue recipes, tips, and interviews from the world of barbecue. If you like baseball and if you like barbecue, then tune in to Baseball and BBQ. Find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and BaseballTalkRadio.com, along with Mets Musings and other great baseball podcasts.
This is Skip Lockwood, and you're listening to Mets Musing.
Hey, baseball fans and book fans as well. This is Frank Nappi, author of the Legend of Mickey Tussler series, inviting all of you to learn more about my protagonist, Mickey Tussler, an incredible pitching prodigy who has autism. Follow Mickey's journey as he captures the hearts of fans everywhere with his blazing fastball and indomitable spirit. Please visit Amazon or www.franknappy.com for more information.
Hi, this is the world-famous Mr. Brewtown of BrewtownSports.podomatic.com. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Google+. Brewtown Sports. You can also listen to the show at Stitcher.com, TuneIn.com, and iTunes.com. And we've got the new one. It's called BrewtownRadio.weebly.com, but the one that I'm most proud of being on is BaseballPodcast.net. It is the home of great baseball talk shows. Check it out, my show and all kinds of other programs all about Major League Baseball. So check it out. That's baseballpodcast.net, the home for great baseball talk shows.
And we are back, and what a great interview with Brett Topel, and pick up the book, Miracle Moments, New York Mets History. Check it out, and you got the dates. He's going to be in Huntington on the, I forget the dates myself now. Well, it's on the interview, so you already know it. But go check it out in Huntington and Rockville Center. He'll be at the Turn of the Corkscrew on the 19th, I believe it is. So it's a great book. I really had a great time reading it. It's a nice, easy read. So perfect for the summer and perfect for baseball. Time to go down on the farm. 51s lost last night, 8-5 to the Reno Aces. The 51s had a lot of chances, but blew most of them, going just 4 for 21 with runners in scoring position. Down 5-1 in the sixth, they manufactured a few runs on an RBI ground out from Jose Lobaton and Patrick Biondi, as well as a sac fly from Matt Dendecker, and an RBI single by Zach Bornstein, but it wasn't enough. Aaron Laffey did not fare well in his second start with the 51s. His control was fine, and he was around the strike zone, but he got hit hard and didn't overpower anyone, collecting only 2 strikeouts. So Reno defeats the 51s 8-5. Binghamton beat the Erie Seawolves 7-3 in 11 innings. Levi Michael, Peter Alonso, Kevin Taylor all drove in runs in Binghamton's big 5-run 11th inning to send the Rumble Ponies to a 7-3 victory over the Erie Seawolves on Wednesday night at UPMC Park. Thrust into duty on short notice, Mickey Janis tossed 7 strong innings, while 3 Pony relievers combined for 4 innings of near spotless relief to seal Binghamton's 6th win in 7 tries. Jupiter beat St. Lucie 7-1. St. Lucie pitchers struggled all night, starting with the 24-year-old Gary Cornish. In his 5th start of the year for St. Lucie, Cornish was hit around for 4 earned runs in his first 2 innings of work. Relievers didn't fare much better. They got knocked around, and the offense was very quiet. The lone run of the night for St. Lucie came in the 8th inning as a result of a throwing error by Jupiter, with Andre Jimenez on second and Desmond Lindsay on first. Luis Carpio grounded into a force out at second base. Andres Jimenez advanced to third and then scored on the throw. And Columbia beat Charleston 2-1. Columbia starting pitcher Tony DeBrell had a solid outing, allowing only 1 earned run over 6 1/3 innings. DeBrell was now allowed 2 earned runs or fewer in 5 of his last 6 starts, dropping his ERA to 3.88 for the year. Columbia offense struggled to find consistency throughout the night. Usual contributors Blake Tiberi and Jeremy Vasquez continued to lead the Fireflies offense. And Wilmer Becerra had 2 hits in the game, but he's yet to walk or get an extra base hit in 8 games for Columbia. We had some moves going on. With all the moves at the major league level, there was also a lot of moves at the minor league level, as teams need to replace people that are going up or whatever, moved around. So in some of the moves in the minors this week, Ryder Ryan, who came over on the Jay Bruce trade, has been promoted from St. Lucie to Binghamton. Catcher Tomas Nido has been assigned to Binghamton, with Plawecki coming back. Right-handed pitchers Joseph Zangi and left-handed pitcher Blake Taylor have been assigned to St. Lucie. Finally, right-handed pitcher Eric Hanhold, who came over in the Neil Walker trade, has been promoted from Binghamton to Las Vegas. And the Columbia Fireflies left-handed pitcher Aaron Ward has been recognized as the Columbia Fireflies Pitcher of the Week, and he got the BC Powder Relief Pitcher of the Month for the month of May, the team announced on Wednesday. Ford appeared in 7 games in May, pitching to a 2.79 ERA in 9 2/3 innings. He faced 37 batters and allowed 9 hits, only 3 of which went for extra bases. He surrendered 3 earned runs while holding opposing batters to a .595 OPS. He has yet to surrender a single walk or home run in the month of May and struck out 9. So congratulations to Aaron Ford on a great month of May and getting that award. Betsy Halifin of the Las Vegas Review-Journal reports that New York Mets right-handed pitcher Andrew Church has retired. Church, 23, was the Mets' 2013 second-round draft pick from Basic High School in Henderson, Nevada. He would make the final two appearances of his professional career in his home state of Nevada for the 51s. His last career came in his penultimate appearance. Church's best season was 2016 when he was 7-4 with a 2.92 ERA for Columbia, St. Lucie, and Las Vegas. Unfortunately, Church was not able to replicate the success in future seasons. Even with Church being unable to replicate his career year, his retirement is a big surprise. At the moment, there has been no explanation for his decision. And finally tonight, Monday, is the MLB Amateur Draft. The Mets have the 6th pick of the draft, and my good friend Jeff from Long Island says they should go with a kid from Florida, third baseman Jonathan India. He has been linked to the Mets in a couple of the mock drafts. Joey Bart, a catcher from Georgia Tech, is another possibility, though some drafts have him going as high as number 2. Alex Bohm, another third baseman from Wichita State, has also been talked about, but it's anybody's guess who will be left when the Mets pick. However, they should concentrate on getting some bats this time, some offensive players. They have a good core of arms. They have the next wave of arms, if you will, is at Columbia and St. Lucie. So they're a couple of years away, but they have quite a few there. Anthony Kay, Justin Dunn, David Peterson, and Thomas Zapucki, who is recovering from Tommy John surgery, but he'll be coming back, and he was ranked very high last year. So they need to start stockpiling outfielders and infielders that can hit. That's what this organization needs, and it seems to be a weakness of theirs that they never seem to be able to do that. So we'll see now with Omar Minaya back. Hopefully he'll have a word or two to say about the draft and be able to push them in the right direction and get some good ball players in here, because they need to do something. Offense can be pitiful at times, and building towards the future and building a team for today with pitching doesn't seem to work. You still need a good pitcher, and you can sprinkle them in there and add pitchers, but they went to get the whole 5 aces thing, and as we see, it hasn't worked out. And it's just not a way to build a team in this day and age. And so we'll see where that takes us. 4 with the Cubbies this week, 2 with the Orioles then, and 3 with the Yankees in this 4-6, 9-game homestand. So get out to the park, check it out, and an update on the scoring of tonight's game. It's 2-0 in the 5th. Good old Hansel Robles gave up a 2-run homer after Seth Lugo pitched 4 good innings. We'll be here again, though, to talk about it next week. And remember, try to keep the faith, stay optimistic, and let's go Mets.